is, to my mind, an extremely undesirable end. I would think it was the least preferable option, that at the end of all of this killing,
well,
Assad stayed in place.
Clearly, we have seen awful ends. Libya is, again, the vivid example of Gaddafi and his end. I think there are clear examples out there to kind of try to hold Assad to a different standard and to try to push him into a different path.
Thanks, Amira, and thanks, Douglas. We'll just have to hold up that conversation there, but there'll be more on Syria in the next hour of the programme. That was Andrew Watts, who sings Fate in the production 3 of The Breakdancers. Well, I had great fun, as you might have heard. And the opera was pretty typical of operas, big set-piece arias, lots of action, even a kebab shop that explodes. So, to Amira Woods first. Amira, you would have found the music and the singing very recognisable as opera.
Oh, it sounded fantastic. I wish I could have been there with you. I think it's a wonderful bridging of culture, of ages, of generations, as we talk about age in this show. To combine opera and hip hop, I think is phenomenal. There was a similar performance here in DC of The Tempest, but science fiction, a sci-fi version of The Tempest, drawing out young audiences, new audiences, multicultural audiences in ways that, The Tempest may not have in and of itself. So I think these opportunities to build bridges among us, among ages, among cultures, among generations, I think those should all be applauded.
Well, I suppose the cynic in me, and this is for you, Douglas, would say that it's to try and get younger audiences into operas. That's what it's about, really. What do you think?
I was rather struck with middle-aged nostalgia when I was, as Miss Prism says, in younger and happier days. I sang countertenor myself, and so lovely to hear that. I'm an admirer of Judith Weir's music.
The boys, the breakdancers, told me that they'd never heard of a countertenor before and had no idea what it was.
It's quite a rare voice, I think. But it was fascinating to hear it. I'd been umming and ahhing about whether or not to go to this opera. I think I almost certainly will now, because the music sounded fantastic. But the thing with experiments like this is that you put breakdancing into opera, you try something new on that. Sometimes it can work, and of course sometimes it's the most jaw-droppingly embarrassing thing imaginable. There was an opera in the 1980s, I think the last opera of the late Sir Michael Tippett, called New Year, which premiered at Glyndebourne. Now I think that may have had breakdancing in it. It certainly had a lot of rap in it, and it just didn't work at all. It's never been put on again. It was a sort of very conscious sense that it was an attempt to sort of be down with it and all that sort of thing, and it just didn't work. But it can work.
Yes, I think they may have learned on this production.
Because for every time something like that sort of fails, there's one that exactly does the right thing and pushes a medium forward.
Yeah, I think you need both, superb singers. The opera singers have to be top of their game, as well as superb dancers, so that they each are reaching people within their souls, within their spirits, and are able to perform their art at their peak. Yeah. So I think it's the quality that people see. So it's not just merging these two in ways that don't show the high caliber of each.
It's got to be the quality of it, but anything that appears to go toward crossover, it's always very important that nobody senses they are being, as it were, spoken down to. And quite often in crossover genres, there's a feeling that one group or other is being spoken down to. And actually, if you can elevate all the genres being used, you've got it.
Well, let's hear a little bit more of the music in a moment, although my view is that if they kept the seats a little bit cheaper,
absolutely,
they would get more people in. I mean, there I was at the front. I couldn't possibly afford that normally.
I want to go to so many productions, but it's impossibly expensive.
Exactly. What do you think, Amira?
We need to democratize our arts.
We certainly do.
I was recently in Cuba, and you could see this outpouring because it's easy, it's affordable. People could all come.
About the only way in which one would ever envy Cuba.
Indeed. Let's end by hearing a bit more of the music. They've given permission for up to 50,000 protesters to gather on one of central Moscow's large avenues. Just to remind you, these protests are following Vladimir Putin's victory in last weekend's presidential election. Some people are still saying that they were not free and fair. Well, our correspondent Richard Gulpin is on that very street now. He joins us live. Richard, are people gathering?
Yes, they are, definitely. They're coming in. I'd say there's a few thousand have gathered so far. And as I look now, I can see certainly people coming in to join the rally. But it's not huge, I have to say, although it's not due to start for another 30 minutes or so. But, you know, the question of the numbers is really the critical one today. There's been quite a lot of talk that momentum has been lost now for this opposition movement, given that Vladimir Putin has already won the election. And I think there are divisions within the leadership of this movement about how to move forward. Should they continue with these street protests? Will they take more direct action? Or will they completely change tack and, for example, try and create political parties to fight within the system? So there's lots of discussion. And the numbers which turn out today, I think, will help determine what direction this movement takes in the coming months.
All right, Richard. Well, let's bring in one of our guests, Douglas Murray. I think Russia's particular cause for concern, or at least for interest for you, is that right?
Yes, but I have to say, I was disturbed by your report earlier mentioning that President Obama had phoned Putin to congratulate him on his election victory. I mean, it seems to me, at any rate, to be pretty obscene that anybody, let alone a world leader like Barack Obama, could congratulate Putin on this as an election victory.
Well, I mean, the Russians would see it as a democratic election. But, Richard, do you want to come in on that?
Well, you know, it is obviously a significant move, the fact that President Obama has now officially congratulated. He's waited, obviously, quite a few days before doing that. And I think certainly the initial statements from Washington were very cautious, in fact calling for there to be a proper investigation into alleged violations and fraud during this election. And there was no congratulations from Mr. Putin at that stage. But now that has been done, partly, I would imagine, because they've come to the conclusion that regardless of how much fraud there was, it seemed that Mr. Putin did get sufficient number of votes legitimately to be elected as president. And I'm sure from Washington's point of view, they want to maintain a relationship with Moscow, particularly as you've been discussing over the whole issue of Syria, and whether Mr. Obama can try and persuade the Russians to change their view on the Syrian crisis.
Well, thanks very much, Richard. I'll let you go because you're on the phone there on a street in Moscow. But I'll bring in Amira Woods, who's in Washington for us. Amira, Douglas mentioned about President Obama congratulating President Putin, although Richard said he waited a couple of days. What's your take on that?
Well, yes, it was quite clear that the election was far from free and fair, and I think many were surprised that the Obama administration actually did come out with such a strong.
Sorry, did you say it was quite clear it was free and fair, or
it was not free and fair?
Right, yeah.
Far from free and fair, right? That it was a flawed election. So the Obama administration waiting was seen as the right thing to do, and now to so forcefully and publicly reach out to Putin is seen as.
Well, the Russian authorities
ironic.
are, of course, saying it was free and fair. They say they put cameras in all the polling stations and so on.
Right, but I think, again, regardless of what they say, the reality is that it was a flawed process right from the start, that Putin even running, was something that the opposition said should not have happened, and that the whole process left a lot to be desired. So for the Obama administration to reach out such a forceful way, I think is something that is worrisome, is seen as perhaps necessary, but it's entirely not the right message to send to the Putin administration. OK, we'll have to leave that topic there for now. Thanks very much, Amira Woods in Washington and Douglas Murray here in London. Stay tuned to the BBC World Today. I'm Dee Sebastian. A summary of all the latest international news coming in just over a minute. But first, let's introduce them. Douglas Murray, you're with me here in London. You're the author of several books, including Neoconservatism, Why We Need It, most recently Sunday, Bloody Sunday. And you're also Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society think tank here in London. Good morning to you, Douglas.
Good morning.
And Amira Woods, you're in Washington for us. Very, very late at night now, Amira. Thanks for staying up for us.
A pleasure.
And you're co-director of the Foreign Policy in Focus think tank at the Institute for Policy Studies. Amira, did you have any idea what that music might be?
Not at all.
And Douglas?
I thought it might be the mating call of the sperm whale or something.
OK, well, more on that later in the programme. Douglas, just tell us a bit more about yourself. I think you're planning a bit of travel in the coming months, is that right?
Yes, I've been hermit-like, trying to finish another book recently, so finally it means I get to do all my travel at once. I'm off to the Far East, the Middle East, Russia, the Caucasus, and America.
And you've got a thing about borders, is that right?
Yes, well, not so much borders as fault lines. I like going to those places in the world where constant problems come from, and just trying to work out what causes them. And they're often political problems, often social problems, ethnic problems. But I just find it constantly fascinating to try to dig down a bit deeper.
You sound a bit like a BBC journalist, Douglas. But anyway, Amira, what have you been up to? You've been to a few private screenings of films this week.
It's been extraordinary.
I'm just going to pop in there to thank very much my guests on the programme today, Douglas Murray, author, journalist, and on the director of the Henry Jackson Society, and Amira Woods. She's in Washington, D.C. She belongs to the think tank Foreign Policy in Focus. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us here today. Goodbye for now from the